Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future with your host, Alan Pentz. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do. Introducing your host, Alan Pentz.
So welcome today. We have Heather Ashby, who is one of our own at Corner Alliance. We're super happy to have her here. She has been working with the federal government in various capacities, but a little bit in the AI space. So we're going to talk a little bit about what she's been up to there. Heather, welcome to the pod. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So give us kind of an idea of some of the things that you've been seeing federal government getting active on AI.
Yeah, I think it falls into two big buckets. One is preparing the workforce. And so ways of training the workforce to enhance their knowledge about AI, machine learning, and how they can incorporate that into their work. The other is the execution of mission sets within the government. So more particular to what NIST is doing and providing guidance to nonprofits, other organizations, industry, and government agencies on risk factors and other guidance documents. Or it could be within Homeland Security, how AI is enhancing the capabilities of FEMA, USCIS, CBP, ICE.
Well, tell us a little bit about that last one first. So where do you see, for DHS in particular, AI is relevant to the missions of like FEMA and ICE and others?
I think for them is that they process so much data. I'm not sure whether too many other federal agencies process as much data that DHS has. And so it's helping them in those areas. Some of it is enhancing training. So there are 3 pilot programs that Department of Homeland Security launched within the AI machine learning space. And so that includes ICE, USCIS, and FEMA. And so those types of projects are enhancing their capabilities to execute their mission. With CIS, it's helping to train the individuals who are screening people and processing those types of identity management capabilities. With ICE, you're seeing it with all the data they process of enhancing data analytics capability to comb through all the information they're seeing to look for trends and patterns. With FEMA, and I'm trying to separate what's publicly available from what I have in my head, is that looking at all their data and combing through patterns and trends as well. And I know not exactly what FEMA is doing, but looking at other articles I've read on what AI could do is that could have an impact on FEMA and as well as broadly the U.S. government is in climate change and climate adaptation to better predict where there's going to be impacts so they could build greater resiliency and response to those challenges.
Interesting. And so like from FEMA perspective, I mean, they've got multiple programs from flood insurance to, disaster aid that they're giving out. And so they have, maps and all sorts of information about different kinds of people that they're helping, and then lots of data that they're gathering about, potential natural disasters and other things in the United States. So they're just massive data sets that they can use AI to help just get more. I guess really what they're trying to do is, well, this would be a question, is it more focused on what trends we can see in the data, or is it also focused on like what parts of this can we sort of automate and or like the administrative side of it, right, of the data collection and those kind of things? So what do you think they're looking at, both of those sides of it?
I think they are emphasizing more the data trends aspect of it. I'm not sure too many agencies are trying to determine where they can automate, because that's more on getting into I mean, I'm trying to be generous about the federal workforce of where they need personnel and where it could be enhanced automation that may not need personnel in that area. Various parts of the federal government have addressed that in terms of applying AI and machine learning to the problem set and automating certain aspects of personnel responsibilities. Because what I have noticed is that there's still a lot of education that needs to be done about separating fact and myth from what AI is capable of doing. And then there's also the aspect that there's limitations on federal employees using AI, or at least generative AI, within their work without having more higher level permissions. So they can't just log on to ChatGPT or Gemini and start put it in federal government data in order to execute their work. So I'm not sure that we're there yet, but definitely in the area of combing through a lot of data, looking for patterns and trends, and doing predictive analytics.
Okay, so much more like mission focused than back office focused. And then, so that kind of leads into, that issue you mentioned just about workforce. So it strikes me this is going to be a massive challenge for the federal government to get the workforce they need to implement these kind of technologies and to get that workforce trained. It's also it's an aging workforce, right? And potentially more resistant to technology change. So are those sort of the main issues you're seeing them struggling with?
Yeah, from my time in the federal government, whether as contractor or federal employee, there were just basic challenges with like saving information on a shared drive. And now you're saying, oh, let's start considering using AI in your work, generative AI. I think that's a challenge. What I've also noticed is that you're seeing more jobs for data scientists, computer engineers being posted with flexible hiring capability for different parts of the federal government that I think they're going to increase, and they're going to have to evaluate how can they continue to bring these people on faster, how can they compete with the private sector, and having those individuals on board, and who is going to serve as that bridge between the more technical experts and the workforce, especially policy folks, to make sure that they're adhering to internal department policy, executive orders, regulations, and so forth. And so I think people are going to have to design new roles, whether it's existing or people within federal government, or their new role capabilities. And that's also an opportunity for contractors to come in and help explain a lot of this for the federal government.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge struggle for them. And my sense is right now, you got some pilot projects like you're talking about with data, at least on the civilian side. Like I'm sure there's plenty of stuff happening in the three-letter agency secured side that we're not as privy to. But it's really more like pilot projects maybe on the data analytics and that kind of thing. But as far as any kind of penetration of these tools into day-to-day workforce, I think it's very minimal at this point. And you're going to have tons of issues with, some amount of resistance to doing it. If it's going to automate jobs, you're going to deal with federal unions, and then just simple training and like security issues. So it strikes me that we're in this phase of like, there's experimentation happening, but there's probably a little more fear of doing the wrong thing than, like any kind of embrace of like, we could, improve everything 10 times right now. And then that'll flip at some point. There'll be like this mandate to implement it everywhere, and everyone will run to try to get it all at once, right?
Definitely. And so that's part of the challenge of, depending on the federal department and how much funds they have, they'll have to invest in the technology, but also in the workforce training. And so how do they manage their resources in order to create those investments for employees?
Do you see a day when like federal workers going to like open up ChatGPT and as a regular part of their job, or how long do you think that's going to take, or do you think it's even going to happen?
I think it's going to depend on different government agencies. I imagine the Commerce Department, especially within the past couple of years, has been playing a more active role within determining AI policy and execution across the federal government, that their workforce has greater capabilities than, say, other federal agencies, and that may not be their focus. I don't imagine like State Department's going to whip out Chat GPT to help them write treaties and agreements, even though that would be a useful service that generative AI could provide for them by scanning previous agreements from other countries, allies, and partners to comb through that information. Like the EU AI Act is pretty long. I'm not sure how many state employees are reading that, but they could use generative AI to help comb through it. And so that's another aspect. It's going to be uneven across the federal government. And so how to address that, I think that's going to be a challenge for Office of Personnel Management to have better visibility into that, as well as the White House.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people outside the government maybe view it as one big thing that where everything kind of moves in lockstep. It's very agency to agency. And there are these, you mentioned the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, and say GSA, General Services Administration, provides some amount of, cross agency work, working with the White House and stuff like that. But how much each department follows that really depends on that department and the people in it. Maybe it's authorities and congressional support and all sorts of stuff. So it's not going to be one lockstep move forward, right?
Yeah, not at all. And it's also going to depend on leadership within each agency of how open they are to try to brainstorm or come up with ideas and applications for this technology. I know within DHS, in the AI roadmap that they released publicly earlier this year, they noted that DHS has been engaging with AI for at least a decade, and that's more on the law enforcement side. And we don't have like an in-depth understanding, understandably, of how they're applying it. But they already have had sections of their department engaging with AI, whereas others are more new to it.
Yeah, exactly. Although I do think there's this thing that, a lot of people were working on, AI projects and different kinds of aspects of AI, but like Chat GPT, I think just kind of opened this whole new thing. It's like a different level of the ability to use AI on almost anything, right? This general purpose kind of AI that no one really had available to them before. And then it was turned into a service that you could pay for every month. Now it's free, obviously, for some. So I think like even that experience that agencies had before isn't the same thing as what's available now. It's like, I think that was just a massive sea change. It was, similar to like Netscape coming out. Other people were using dial-up, right? But like the crappy old chat rooms from 1990 aren't the same thing as getting on Yahoo even in 98, right? It was different. And I think it's a similar change, right, that we've seen.
Yeah, and I think another aspect that I've seen some discussion about is, and it falls within the mission set, but maybe it should be its own category, is for those federal agencies that are in a customer service role. How can they deploy this technology to be more helpful and to, by extension, restore trust in government capabilities? Rather than saying, oh, this is going to take so long. Why is it so slow? Why isn't government being more helpful? I think there's great potential in that area.
And probably what we'll see is a lot of the adoption will come through existing vendors, right? So if they're using, some kind of call software, like a call center has various things that it's using, various programs that it's using to deal with the call volume, like tools get integrated into that use AI. But it'll be the question of how long it's going to take the government to adopt its policies to do that, right? Because like what you're doing is putting a bunch of data into that system to then generate answers, maybe something like that. How long is it going to take a department that like FEMA or that takes calls or anybody, the IRS or anybody else? Like how long is it going to take them to allow the data to go into the software that would allow the call takers to actually use it?
Oh, and that reminds me of AI machine learning expert I spoke to who discussed the need for federal agencies to clean up their data. And so before you can get to the use of it, you need to make sure that the data being inputted for these generative AI tools, that some of which could be designed specifically for a mission set within a department, that the data is good. Otherwise, it would just encourage people not to use the tool after all of this investment.
Although I think this is, 100% it'll be like a big data cleaning and ordering exercise. But it is interesting to me that probably there's no other organization on the face of the earth that has more data like sitting around inside of it than all the federal agencies. They just got reams and reams of data from, some of them 150, 200 years, right? But so there are not a lot of organizations that have that I think could derive the same benefit if it was fully exploited. But I think the message kind of today is it's going to take a while, right? And the government's not going to be on the bleeding edge of implementing it for what a lot of companies are doing, which are these back office support tasks. It's probably more likely that the government, or at least the way it's working right now, it's going to be more mission oriented sort of stuff that's the leading edge of AI for the government.
Yeah, and I want to go back to a point you made earlier about the government relying on existing vendors and whether you see any challenges in that area based on your decades of experience and consulting with the government. What are some of the pitfalls of doing that, or some of the useful areas of relying on people who have that experience and dialogue with different government offices?
Obviously, I think the government's just a different challenge for most vendors, right? And it'll be interesting for me to see, for all of us to see, what the process of because up till now you've seen a lot of, say, like, first it was on-prem, but now it's cloud software, and then cloud created a series of issues that kind of coincided with a more and more focus on cybersecurity. And so you saw like a whole program get rolled out by the federal government, FedRAMP, amongst other things, that, hey, software vendor, cloud vendor, you've got to go through these processes. We've set up the processes. That all took years to get in place. And now it's sort of like this regular thing that if you want to sell to the government, you take your commercial product, maybe it needs to be adapted a bit, but it feels probably like Salesforce's version that's running in the government cloud isn't that different from its regular cloud. And so I think, what I wonder is just how long is it going to take for the government, like maybe it's just changing FedRAMP a little bit or adapting it, but how long is it going to take it to build all that infrastructure that it did over the last 10 years? And it's just not as a responsive an environment. And then how much are the actual software, the services that are offered, like going to have to adapt to the federal environment? And is it going to be as easy as it was in the cloud environment? I think those are going to be big questions that we have to see, or like, is government going to have more AI applications that are essentially unique to it? And that'll be a key question. And it's a real risk. I think it's a real risk for the government, because if it can't adapt to those commercial processes, then it loses the innovation. I think it's always been a problem for the government. This kind of push-pull has always been there, but it does feel like the speed keeps picking up, and the government's ability to adapt to it maybe isn't picking up quite as quickly.
Definitely. And I would see that within Congress in particular, about the questions they ask in terms of each department secretary is planning their budget and where are their investments, making sure that Congress is informed about, hey, this is a needed investment, so allocate the budget to allow us to do this.
And obviously, like, those kind of systems where you're budgeting, Congress is allocating funds and doing authorizing language and appropriations language and oversight, and then the federal, it's a very complicated process, and it doesn't respond overnight, right? So I think this whole adoption question is going to be really interesting. And I even look at something like, this is something I haven't tracked most recently, but like Microsoft releasing all these co-pilots for its Office suite, like government's probably not going to be able to adopt that because it's not going to fit. It's going to be something that, and I'd be very curious to hear, like, actually, if you see it starting to be adopted and how. Obviously, that's sort of the way most organizations are going to see AI starting to get integrated, is those kind of add-ons to the existing software. And like, is the government going to allow that to happen? I don't see it signing all its people up for co-pilots in the next couple of years, right?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything more in response to that effort about whether people are using Copilot or other services. But I also think that will reveal whether they're using it or not. I think there's still socialization that needs to happen in using these types of tools and making sure people feel like they're not cutting corners and they could be open that I use this to accomplish X. This is the challenge I encountered, and it was helpful in providing a solution. And I don't think we're there yet. I think certain groups of employees may have those conversations, but in terms of having that cultural push within an agency, I don't think it's there yet.
Right. And it probably feels like right now, again, going back to what you were saying, it's like people are starting pilots and experiments. And it's true that, again, want to be clear, government's been working with AI for a long time, but sort of like in this new chat GPT kind of driven era, it feels like it's more experimentation and piloting than it is like super high pressure to adopt at this point. Is that how you characterize it?
I have to give credit to the Secretary of Homeland Security. In his budget testimony, he was highlighting further investment in pilots and being more forward leaning. And so I think having that spread among more heads of departments would be so useful, that it's okay to experiment, that you are going to fail in certain respects, and be willing to defend your decision making process along the way, and to know that if it doesn't succeed in this area, it doesn't mean you should cut it out completely. You just look for other applications.
To that point, I mean, I think the piloting and experimentation is crucial right now because the government's hand will get forced on AI at some point. And I think it'll largely come from the use of it amongst citizens and interest groups coming to the government. You look at things like, I was just thinking about, I've speculated before about regulatory filings, right? You put out a regulation, you get a comment period. People are going to mass produce, probably already are, to be honest, like mass produce comments using AI. And they can just totally overwhelm the federal ability to, like, if you're not using AI to then synthesize and collate and understand those comments, like, you're just going to get totally overwhelmed. I mean, you could file FOIA requests every day of the week, right? That 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can, applications for drugs at the FDA, just over and over and over again. It's almost like, AI could create this massive denial of service attack across the government, and maybe for totally legitimate purposes, like people actually are commenting on regulations and they want to make a comment, but it's just their ability to do it at scale is so much larger. So I just feel like you have to experiment and pilot now because that stuff is coming for you pretty soon, and it'll play out differently in each agency. But you better start creating policies, understanding what you're working with, having vendors that can bring in help for you, because you're going to start seeing agencies getting challenged in that way.
It may be already taking place to different degrees, but they're just not revealing it right now, in order not to encourage other actors to engage in that type of activity. S&T did release a report late last year focused on adversarial AI. And while that focuses on more of or to a degree, the geopolitical aspects of how Russia or China and other actors could use AI in a damaging aspect for U.S. national security. I think what you point out, it doesn't necessarily have to be those big state actors or other larger groups. It could happen on a smaller scale that still have an adverse impact on government operations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can see both things happen. Both things will happen, which is like you will see adversarial, attacks, and you will see just people operating at a higher scale, their ability to operate at like a higher scale because AI enables them. Both will create challenges for government. And the second will be totally legitimate interest trying to, like, for instance, what if I can discover 1 million drugs that will save people's lives in 1 year through AI or something, something like that, and I submit them all to the FDA, right? That's a legitimate purpose. It's great. It should save all those people's lives, but there's no way that agency can deal with that given current processes. So I think you'll see things on both sides of that coin.
To your point about vendors, I think that's where vendors could be so helpful for the federal government and providing this type of support and capability and just having these ideas of where the pitfalls are and where the opportunities are as well. Because federal employees, in particular of certain departments, are so swamped right now thinking through these various challenges, especially in the policy and regulatory aspect, that they may not have time to consider the opportunities or research how attacks may be taking place in other parts of the world or against state and locals that they're not tracking.
So if you were thinking across the stuff you're kind of seeing, like anything you think like in the next year or two is going to be like the big exciting thing that we should be looking forward to on the AI front?
I try to emphasize that it's hard to move forward without a workforce that has greater knowledge and capability. And so I think you're going to see greater enhancements and adaptation among federal workforce and sort of pushing through some of those concerns about how to apply and use generative AI in their daily tasks. I think it's going to increase among the federal workforce to a point where there's going to be greater dialogue internally on it. And to cheat on that question, add another aspect of it, I think one of the biggest challenges for the government now and into the future, in which AI could be useful for, is just government messaging and the services government provides. Because there's all these challenges about whether what information the government provides, if it's accurate, or distrust in government. And I think that's going to be a tremendous challenge in the future. Of the government may enhance its capabilities, but whether the public is receptive to that or believes that the government is actually doing good will be a huge issue. And this is something I've talked about with people in the government, and the White House released a strategy in 2022 on information integrity as a response to the challenges government has encountered in communicating information and the public not believing in it or countering it, and deep fakes along those lines, and disinformation.
So what do you think they can do to ensure integrity?
Yeah, I think one big area is to invest in deepfake detection software. Because at the same time, the capability of generating these images is accelerating. You also need to accelerate how to identify these images, video, audio, which could be of the president, other secretaries of departments, senior officials, that could spread false information, misleading information out there that completely undercut the mission set of an agency.
It's interesting. I've seen the venture capitalist Mark Andreessen talks a lot about, one of his ideas was to digitally watermark information. So and I think his angle was using some kind of like blockchain, crypto kind of way, and technically beyond what I understand. But somehow you could have like a blockchain that would verify information, and that couldn't be faked, which I don't understand how, but potentially, the government is going to need to really figure out how to effectively watermark information so that it's from an actual government source. It's common. I mean, it's probably already here. I've already gotten notices from government agencies about tax things that are obviously scams. And right now it's pretty easy to detect, but I think that's going to be huge in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and you're already seeing more scams take place because of the public release and access to these generative AI tools. And that poses a challenge for law enforcement of protecting the public. And so as those accelerate, will the capabilities of the government to combat it accelerate as well? And as we noticed, like all these hurdles and challenges for the government to adapt technology, to experiment, to test out new ideas, whether there's going to be more pressure and a forcing function on the government to do this.
Well, definitely, I think we're going to see a lot of pressure on the government to research. One of the leaders in researching how to combat, how to do detection of, scams and information, and how to ensure integrity of information. And I think we've, like what we've done to date seems, there are ways of like, I don't know, you get something and you can go back to the website or call a number that you got off the internet to verify that what came to you was correct. And there's some kind of workarounds we have, but I just think those will be easily defeated by AI, where they can duplicate websites, all that kind of stuff it'll be a pretty easy for someone to create an elaborate apparatus, and we'll need like a new kind of approach to that going forward.
And I would say that's similar to how the Biden administration has thought about in the cyberspace about a whole of society approach, that you need to think of the workforce. You need to have companies be more active in detecting threats and communicating to the federal government what the vulnerabilities and attacks on their systems. And so it's not just on the person at the end user on these within cybersecurity. It's multiple aspects involved. And I think that's going to be a part of this work around AI, that they need to think of a whole of society approach, not only for the current federal workforce, but people who are coming into the federal workforce. What are the requirements that they need, and understanding potentially AI just to execute their daily responsibilities. But we get to a point where the government posts job descriptions that include must have or nice to have.
Must have prompt engineering. Yeah, I'm waiting for that. Well, this has been great. I think, just highlighting a couple of issues, like, sounds to me like key right now is workforce development for the federal government, and then increasing experimentation and pilots in order to really start getting experience with the technology, because like you said, that whole of society, but certainly a whole of government approach is going to be necessary to, one, take advantage of AI, but also to like prepare for what the government needs to do to combat the bad aspects of what's going to happen. And if we don't get on top of that soon, we're going to be way behind the eight ball. So I appreciate those thoughts, and thank you for coming on the pod today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. This was a delightful discussion.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.